What is medical gaslighting? It's when a physician wrongfully blames the patient for having a psychological problem when the patient comes to them with a symptom complaint. That they are in pain or they feel sick or whatever. And try to convince the patient, that, it's just depression, it's just anxiety, it's all in their head, it's, nothing serious, or they minimize it. Like, maybe it feels bad, but it's nothing serious. It just might feel that way. And medical gaslighting is becoming more and more common. People are talking about it more. At least people are talking about it more, which is good. But we have a long way to go to put it to a stop. Doctors all over the world gaslight patients all the time. And what's their motive? Well, a few things. For one, they might have to be, protecting a tight budget. They're trying to save money. They can't afford to treat the person's illness, basically. The system funding them can't afford to treat it. They're maybe not allowed to treat it or order a test for that. In Canada, only certain tests are covered. So they're trying to apparently make the patient feel better by convincing them that it's not real. Or they're embarrassed that they don't know what the patient's problem is. And instead of investigating it, they dismiss it because it's an ego thing. So there's different reasons why they gaslight. But, and yeah, I know that my eyes look terrible today, but, what do I care? It's a bad day for me. Anyway, this problem, medical gaslighting, does so much harm. It takes lives. It costs lives, is what it does. Because people are not diagnosed in a timely manner when they're gaslit, and they develop depression and anxiety, which might complicate their symptoms. They might be confused about if they're really having symptoms or if they're maybe just going crazy, because that's what the doctor said. And it also affects their family and friends. If the family and friends, are affected by the gaslighting, they may not believe and support their own loved one, which is really a terrible experience, to have your family and friends not believe you and not support you. It depends on the family. Some of them go, my family member would never be like this, would never choose to be tired and, seeming so sick like this, and look at their dark circles, look at how bad they look. This is not, this isn't right. The doctor is wrong. Sometimes they stand up for them, but sometimes they're just brainwashed with cognitive dissonance. They're in denial because they believe the doctor. Those people tend to be very, I guess, obedient, kind of authority respecting kinds of people, and they give authority a lot more credit than sometimes they might deserve. And so it's sad, because I've seen people who've had the experience of their family abandoning them. And, sometimes it's because the family member can't help them or doesn't want to help them, and it's a burden to them and it's an annoyance to them. So they're being narcissistic, basically. So, gaslighting comes from narcissism. That's what it comes from. So the doctor's ego, in gaslighting is usually coming from a narcissistic place. Not that all doctors are actual narcissists, but they often have traits of narcissism because of the position of power they're in and their egos. Although sometimes, there are times where the doctor knows they're gaslighting. There are other times that the doctor has actually gaslit themselves and convinced themselves that there's nothing really wrong with the patient. If they convince themselves, it's because they want to feel better about doing that to them, basically. They want to feel better about it, so they convince themselves that there's nothing wrong with the patient. Or they know full well that the patient is sick, and they just gaslight them anyway. And, that's almost worse because it's intentional. The other one maybe is not intentional. Maybe they feel the pressure to, hide, to conceal certain illnesses that don't have, easy answers, and have, expensive, complicated treatments that a system can't or won't support. But it doesn't turn out well when people are gaslit earlier on, when they're genuinely sick. It never turns out well because they will often get sicker, and eventually it's going to be obvious that they're sick, and by then they might be at a point of no return and not be able to get treatment. In the cases of things like cancer, where people earlier on said they didn't feel well and they were dismissed, and then it turns out to be cancer. That happens frequently. Doctors all over the world use gaslighting. It needs to stop, and it ruins lives. It traumatizes people. It causes a lot of psychological trauma. It really does. And I can tell you firsthand that it does. And the kinds of things that people do when they're gaslit, well, their self-esteem suffers. They may not take very ideal care of themselves, which will also make the illness worse. It affects everything. It makes such a huge impact on somebody, medical gaslighting. It's very traumatic physically because the illness doesn't get addressed on time and could get worse and even deadly. Mentally, emotionally, because it causes depression and anxiety and OCD and all kinds of, mental health issues. And circumstantially, friends and family might not support you. You don't have a diagnosis to get possible resources for things, medications that you need. It's extremely damaging.